Hi, thank you for joining me. I've talked a lot about anxiety in other videos. Anxiety is a very common problem, and something closely related to that is worrying. We spend a lot of time worrying. There is such a thing as worry about worry. That means worrying that you will feel worried about something in the future. A lot of worrying is just that, worry about worry, because no one wants to feel worried. We naturally want to avoid feeling negative emotions. When you worry about something happening or going wrong, you're mostly worrying about how it will affect you, how it will make you feel. Sometimes you can feel anxious without really knowing why. Often it has to do with the fear of things that are out of your control, having something happen that you don't want. Uncertainty creates anxiety, and there are not many things that you can have complete certainty about. The fear is that life will not feel tolerable and you will not be able to cope with the bad feelings. Worrying can quickly escalate, and it has a domino effect. You feel worried about one thing, you feel worried about everything, and the imagination comes into play. If the worrying isn't addressed, it can turn into anxiety, and the problem gets bigger. The thing about anxiety is that it just goes round in a constant circle until you address the thoughts that are behind it. I learnt to manage my anxiety through CBT, which stands for Cognitive Behavioural Therapy. One of the greatest things I learnt was how to cross-examine the thoughts. The first thing to realise is that thoughts are not facts. They don't necessarily equal reality, even if they feel like they do. You have to try and look at it objectively, which can be hard when you have high anxiety, because your thoughts can get distorted. Everything gets magnified, so often things seem a lot bigger than they actually are, and it can be hard to think rationally. Anxiety is a fear caused by a perceived threat, whether it's real or not. Your mind is telling you a story. In reality, the threat might be this big, but in your head, it feels like it's this big. Fear is a very powerful emotion, and it can take over very quickly because we're programmed to try and survive. That's why we have fear. The natural response is to try and fight it, but that only makes it worse. You can't fight fire with fire. You have to use something else. You can't force away anxiety. You have to use the analytical part of your brain to question it. What you have in your mind is a belief. What you have to try and see is if and how it can be backed up. Dealing with anxiety is a bit like being a detective, because what they do is they look for evidence. They work on fact, not theory. You have to become your own detective. You have to try and separate real facts from theories. The first question to ask yourself is, what is the evidence for it? Is it concrete evidence, or is it just circumstantial? Would it stand up in a court of law? Then turn it around to see what is the evidence against it. This helps you to see whether there really is a threat or not, and if so, how big it actually is. It helps to write it down, list all the evidence for and against it, so you can actually see it in front of you and keep it as a reminder to yourself. Also, you can ask yourself what you would do if the worst did happen. What would that mean for you? How would you deal with it? And how could you improve the situation? That can help to take some of the fear out of it. Anxiety is driven by the emotional part of the brain, and you have to try and go over to the logical side to dissect the thoughts. There is an equation. For anything to happen, something has to come before it. So really break it down, ask yourself, what would it take for that to happen? How would it happen? Is it really the most likely scenario? And is there anything you can do to reduce the chances? It can feel like hard work at first, but the great thing about doing this is that after a while it becomes automatic. Your brain will just do it by itself. because it becomes trained to do it. Repetition creates habitual thinking. I do it now without having to think about it. It doesn't take away the anxiety completely, but it definitely helps. If anxiety is becoming a problem, then you need to seek professional help, because if you don't, it just keeps on building up until you get to the point where you're feeling sick all the time, you're having problems with sleeping, and you're unable to do anything. It's a lot better if you can deal with it early, before it gets to that stage. If you are suffering from extreme anxiety, then don't despair. It can be brought under control if you get help. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for watching. See you next time.